morning everybody, and welcome back to the Pottery Corner, my studio down on the south coast of England. And today we're going to do a Top Tip Tuesday tutorial for a change on how to make sculptural poppy heads. So we make these quite a lot in class, and of course there's no classes going on at the moment, so I thought that I would do a video and show you how to make something like this to go in your garden. So this is made from craft crank clay, and it can stay in the garden all year round. And obviously there are various ways that you can style your poppy heads. These are smaller and have different bits and pieces on them, which I will talk through as we go. So without further ado, she says, trying to put them back on the shelf, there we are. So we're starting by rolling out a slab, which I've pre-prepared mine in true Blue Peter fashion for you people of a certain age, although I think Blue Peter's still on the telly for children at the moment. Now I use semicircular moulds. Now these I have literally made myself. These are just bisqued clay, and these were made from these stainless steel semicircular little bowls that actually came from IKEA. So all I've done is moulded the clay over the top of there and then bisque fired it. And obviously because it is bisque fired, it takes the moisture out of the clay when you mould it over the top. So that's quite a good way of doing it. If you don't have bisque fired moulds, it's not a problem. You can simply put cling film over the top of something that is semicircular and then mould your clay on top of there, but leave it until it gets leather hard before you turn it over and take the mould out and the cling film off. So you don't have to have pre-prepared moulds. You don't have to go to the cost of doing that. But I obviously run a studio here with classes, so the students use them quite a lot, and I have them in various sizes. And they don't just make poppy heads, they can make anything that starts with a sphere. So I'm going to just discuss very quickly this clay. So this is craft crank clay. So it is stoneware, fired to stoneware temperature, top temperature, on the glaze firing of 12-30 degrees C. It's very, very groggy. So it has lots and lots of grog particles in it. So it's a very robust clay, and it can stay outside all year round. So it's perfect for using if you're going to do any garden ornaments or anything that you wanted to stay out all year, like bird tables or fountains or that type of thing. As I say, I've rolled out my slab. I haven't made it too thin. That's probably third of an inch, I would say. And then I'm just going to form the clay around the mould. So this is your stage one. I use glaze bottles to prop my moulds up onto, because I find that it's better to have them off of the surface. So I'm going to grab myself my whirler, pop my mould and my glaze pot on there, and then I'm going to just lift up the slab, pop it on the top and gently mould it down over this mould. So don't try and do it all in one go. It's better to sort of just ease it gently over the top of the mould. And of course it's going to flare out a little bit. I'm going to get rid of the rest of this so that I don't have that in front of me. Right, so once we've got it to here, I'm going to just trim off the excess. So I'm just going to make sure that that's actually more or less touching the mould, just by taking that down a little bit. We've obviously got a lot of excess on there. I'm going to try and do this towards you rather than towards me so that you can see what I'm doing. But I'm literally at the moment just hacking off what I don't need on this mould without being too particularly dainty about it. just get the most of the weight off that I don't need on there. Okay, right, so that's my excess clay. That can be obviously reused, re-wedged, reused, never throw any clay away. You can always reuse it. So I'm just going to use my rubber kidney to compress the clay over this mould. Now I'm not pressing too hard because I don't want to make it any thinner than it is, but I just want to compress the clay because I didn't compress the slab, so because I wanted it to be flexible enough to go over the mould, but now I am compressing it over the top of the mould just by running the rubber kidney over the top without pressing too hard, because as I say, I don't want to make the actual clay thickness terribly much thinner. But you can see by just doing that that it pulls the clay down onto the mould like so, and then I'm going to trim again so that I've got the surface that I want to have, and I'm literally just using my knife, running it round and taking off whatever is excess underneath this mould. And I'm using the blade flat so that it leaves me a flat surface to do the scratch and sniff, as I call it, which is joining the two pieces together, which we're going to do in a moment. So you can spend more time making that pretty, but that's the basic form of putting it over the mould. And I'm just pressing it just to make sure it's still in contact with the mould and it's not flaring out on the edges. And then because it's on a bisque mould, in the summertime you'll probably find that a couple of hours on a bisque mould will be long enough to draw out enough moisture for it to hold its shape. If I try to take it off now, in fact I'll show you, if I take it off this mould now, it will just flop. As you can see, it will misshape really easily because it's just too soft to use. So leave the mould inside, pop it back on there, make sure that it's fit, and then I would leave that for a couple of hours in the summer. In the winter I've left the pre-prepared moulds out overnight because it's cold, and therefore, you know, they're not drying at the same rate. Okay, so the next thing to do is these poppy heads have little bases on them, so like a little ring, which just helps to anchor them into the soil or the gravel or whatever that you're going to put them into. So you can see on this one that there's like a little foot ring, and all that does is it kind of just holds it. If you wanted to position it on its side or on the top or wherever, it just sort of holds it so that it's not rolling around. It just gives it that little bit of stability. I'm just going to show you one thing. This is Charlie. This is Charlie. He's one of my studio dogs. He's the one that's more camera shy. But today he's decided he wants to be out with Mum. So say hello to everybody, Charlie. Yes, you're beautiful. Go on then, go and lie down. Right, so on this we need to apply the foot ring. So normally, obviously I will make them in twos, but for demonstration purposes I would then have the two moulds with two lots of this on, and then one lot needs to have a foot ring. So I'm going to make sure that my piece is centred on my whirler, and I'm just going to hold my knife just to mark a ring on the base so that I've at least got something that's vaguely in the middle. Okay, vaguely in the middle, doesn't have to be exact. It's not an exact science. In some ways I think it's better if things are left a little bit perfectly imperfect. So I'm using a scratching serrated kidney to just scratch the surface, and I've given it a really good scratch, and then I'm using the craft crank slip, which is basically just the clay body in water, and it's all nice and gooey like mud. So I need to attach, that's my glue to attach my foot ring. So I've rolled out very quickly, just from those little bits of edging that we cut off, a coil. which I'm just going to attach onto the foot ring very quickly. You can obviously take your time. I'm just trying to get this bit done fairly quickly. I do tend to do a 2 coil foot ring, so again I'm scratching the top of that coil, and I'll just grab an extra bit of clay out of the box, quickly roll out a quick coil. Try not to stand on Charlie's tail. Right, so another little bit of slip on top of that scoring. Try to sort of not put your join in the same place when you're coiling. So I'll start this coil away from the previous join. And then I'm cutting through the 2 sections of this coil so that I get a nice edge. I'm not worried about slipping that central piece because this clay is nice and wet. So I'm just going to make sure that I have positive pressure applied so that I make sure that that is actually attached and it's not just floating on the top of the slip. And then I'm going to take a simple wooden tool, and I'm going to put my glasses on because I'm blind as a bat, and I'm going to just smooth the coil on the inside by bringing up the clay to join those 2 coils together, and smoothing on the outside downwards so that I'm joining part of the, if I bring that a bit closer you'll be able to see, part of the clay down onto the actual body of the sphere. So whirlers are always jolly useful because you can just use them to turn your piece without having to move your hands. So you don't have to be particularly clean and tidy. As I said before, you know, actually I quite like them a little bit more rugged. They don't have to be totally smooth. And anyway, we will be doing other processes which will negate the need to do that. So I'm just making sure that that's all nice and clean in there. I'm going to run my finger inside just to smooth that down. Okay. And again, I'm just going to use my kidney just to ensure that that join onto the sphere is as good as I can make it, because we don't want it falling off. And then I'm going to use a paddle. I have various paddles. Most of them are kitchen utensils that I've found in thrift shops or charity shops as we call them over here. And then I'm just going to make that into a slightly nicer shape than it was. Very gently, just give it a quick bash. There we are, and that is done. So that foot ring is now set, as you can see, onto the bottom of this sphere. I'm not worried that it's not magically in the middle. I'm not worried that it's leaning a little bit. As I say, that's absolutely fine. If you want to be more precise, please do. So that's the first stage. So you have 1 sphere with a foot ring and 1 sphere without a foot ring, so that the 2 pieces will join together. So those are done. And then you end up as if by magic. And as I say, in true Blue Peter style, here's some I prepared earlier. So this is a slightly bigger, and you'll see when I lift this from the mould, it's now not losing its shape. It's still leather hard, it's not that dry, but it's not moving in its form. It has now set to this sphere shape, so that I'm not having to worry about pushing it out of shape when I start to mould it. So that's a slightly bigger bisque mould than the previous one, so this one will be slightly larger, and I do make them usually in sets of 3, 1 large, 1 small, and 1 medium and 1 small. So this is the other half of that one that's come off of the mould the same size. And as you can see, anything to be used as a prop. Right, so at this stage I now have a top and a bottom, and it's fine to stand on its stand because it's dried sufficiently that that stand can now take the weight. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use the shore form, and I'm just going to very gently take off the nubs where the surface of this clay is not quite flat, so that I can join it together. So I'm not being particularly pedantic about it, but I'm just taking off the edges that are angled to make it flat, so that I've got a good area to scratch and attach. Right, so attach the two pieces together. So we're using the serrated kidney to scratch the surface, and I like to give things a really good go, and I cross hatch. So I go round one way and then I go round the other way to cross hatch it, so that I've got a lovely deep score, as you can see on there. So that's the top, this is the bottom, and whatever I take off the kidney goes into the slip bucket, slip pot. So again, round one way and then cross hatching it back the other. So again, a lovely surface all rucked up for the slip to get into. So at this point we're going to join the two pieces together, and I'm going to use a generous amount of slip. Don't be shy with it. It won't work if you don't use enough of it. If you're just putting a very slight smear on, it won't actually do the job, because this is obviously a closed form. You're not going to be able to join the inside because it's obviously inside the sphere. So I'm just giving one surface a really, really good amount of slip, and then I'm going to take the top and I'm going to just offer it up, as they say, so that I make sure that I can get it as close onto the sphere before I start manipulating it, to make sure that it's all kind of where it needs to be. And it's still soft enough that you can push in the edges, just to make sure that you have a sphere that kind of is a sphere. And then I'm going to pinch those two together so that I get some seepage of this slip, so that I know that that slip is actually doing its job, and it's not, as I say, just floating there. So I'm just coaxing the two edges together like so. So I know that those two pieces of clay are touching, and it's not just air underneath that seam. Okay, so that's quite important, that you don't have any air within the seam itself. So I'm just making sure that that is actually attached and glued together. So at this point, I need another coil. We love a good coil. Right. So to attach those two pieces together and make sure that it's strong and durable and stable, I'm going to roll out a coil, and obviously I want it to go around the circumference of this sphere. So it doesn't have to be pretty, it's only a joiner. I'm going to lose most of it. Don't make it too thick or you'll be scraping it away forever, as you'll see in a minute. So you don't want too wide a coil. So now that the two pieces are together, like so, I'm going to use the serrated kidney again and go round the join, scratch the join like so, all the way around. Make sure it's got a good scratch on it, and again that goes in the slip bucket. And then I'm going to slip the scratching, again, nice generous slip. It doesn't cost you anything really, because it's made out of all the little bits and clippings and whatever dried bits of clay end up on your work surface, so be generous with it. It's doing a good job. If you don't use enough of it, then you'll find that your work will split. Okay, so now I've got that on there, and then I'm going to use the coil on the centre of the join, and I'm going to just push the coil onto that join. So I'm just sort of like flattening the coil. So I'm smushing it on, as you can see, actually on that join line all the way around. So I'm just going to use my finger just to push that down onto the join line on top of the slip. Okay, turn that round towards you, see what I'm doing, hopefully. All right. Doesn't have to be pretty, as I said before, it's just a strengthening thing. So I'm just going to push that on, make sure that I'm happy that it's actually attached to the slip, as I was saying before, make sure there's no air. And then I'm going to just smooth it with my modelling tool. I'm going to take half of the coil downwards and half of the coil upwards so that it's actually joined those two pieces together. I'm not going to worry about the excess at the moment because the next step will take that off, but I want to make sure that we can't see that join line any longer. It's completely gone. It's underneath this section of coil where we've just added the extra on. So I'm just going to put my glasses on so I can see what I'm doing and quickly attach that on. So as I say, it doesn't have to be pretty. Just make sure that it's actually covering that join all the way around. Rid of that. Okay, that's one way. Let's do the other. Right, getting there. You obviously could take a bit more time on this, but it doesn't, as I say, another thing that doesn't have to be pretty, because the next section, the next technique that we're going to do is going to remove most of that anyway. So don't spend a lot of time trying to make it pretty because you don't need to. Right, okay, so I'm quite happy that that's actually joined. And then I'm going to use a rubber kidney, a metal kidney this time, because these are nice and flexible, so you can actually flex them to what degree of curve you want. And I'm going to remove the sort of belly of this. It looks like a flying saucer at the moment because it looks like two halves. But if I actually bend my flexible kidney, I'm just going to take off most of what we've actually just applied. But obviously by doing so, we have strengthened that join. So again, I'm using the whirler to just help me take this off. And I'm bending my kidney so that it keeps the contour of the circle. And I'm going to take off that sort of UFO belly bit that we added with the coil. As you can see, by the end of it, there probably is not much of the original coil that we put on, but that join is secure. You can no longer see those two pieces. Right, okay, so I'm happy with that. Again, I'm not too worried about how rough this surface is. A, because I can just use my rubber kidney to smooth it, and B, because we're going to do some paddling to refine our shape. Right, so there we are. That's the two pieces joined together. So we now have a sphere with a foot. So there's our foot, there's our sphere joined together. Okay, now I'm going to use, this one again is a kitchen spatula, and it's got this lovely curve on it, And I often find that things that you buy in the thrift shop or in a charity shop can be repurposed for clay. So you don't always have to spend lots of money on expensive clay kit. This actually came from a foreign holiday we went on where a man had handmade these. And it's got such a lovely curve on it. It's absolutely perfect for using on these because the curve is already helping me to make this more spherical. So I'm just gently patting. I'm not going too mad with force. All I want to do is basically pat that join so that it makes it more spherical without too much of a belly. By adding the coil, we do add a bit of a belly, and I'm just trying to pat away the belly on the join. And again, you can be as pedantic or not as you want to be. I don't tend to, you know, in life and in nature, nothing is perfect. So I try not to be too neat over things like this, because I think if it looks too neat, it looks too contrived. So I won't say I'm slapdash, but I will say that I tend to sort of like it to look a little bit rugged, because obviously it's a poppy head, and in nature, you know, they're not perfect. It's not going to be a perfect item. So I'm quite happy that I've mostly removed the belly from this sphere. So I'm quite happy with that now. So I'm still left with my foot, which is doing its job, holding it up. And I've joined the two pieces together, and I have strengthened the join, and I'm quite happy that that is fine and joined together. So the next step is to mark off our segments. So if I just pick up one of these, let's move that one out of the way. So these poppy heads have spines, or whatever you want to call them, on the sides here. So this is the bit that we're actually going to be applying next. They are made by extruding, which I'll go into in a minute, but I do 8 spines per poppy head. So it's an even number. Let's pop that over there. So I'm going to just mark with a ruler on the top of this poppy head a line more or less in the centre. Again, you know, if you want to be pedantic about where your centre is, please do. You make a mistake, you can always rub it out. So I'm going to start by putting a cross over the top. Okay, so that's fairly even and equal, and then I'm going to go through the middle of the square that I've just made, if that makes sense, through the centre one way and through the centre the other way, and that gives me 8 quadrants. Okay, so I've gone one way and the other way and then halfway between the two to make 8 segments on the top. And then I'm going to extend the lines, so I'm going to make sure that this is in the middle of the whirler. I'm going to extend the lines by, let's do it this way round, putting the ruler on the whirler, putting my knife on the point, and just running my knife blade down the edge of the ruler. So I find that's the easiest way. I'm sure you have your own way of doing it, but for me, I just run the, if I have the ruler on the whirler, I just run the blade down the edge of the ruler. I find that's, you know, more or less the easiest way to do it. I'm sure there's other ways of doing it, but being a left-handed person, I find that quite easy. So just pop those on. So I've now marked up my sphere, with its 8 points so that I know where my spines are going to attach. And as I say, if you make a mistake and you think, well, they're not all completely even, they don't all need to be completely even, but if you find that you've got a much bigger segment, you can always just rub out your line and start again. Okay, so we've got to this stage and I now have here's one I made earlier. So this is now ready for the spines to be attached. So talking about the spines, I have a wall mounted and a handheld coil extruder. The handheld one I use if I don't need very much, and obviously if I'm making a coil pot I use the wall one. But these you can buy relatively cheaply online. If somebody's very cleverly turned a mastic gun into a clay extruder, so that's what that is. If you're using it a lot, you probably would want to get a wall mounted one, but for what I need to do on these, I just use this handheld one. And it comes with different dies, different discs, different extrude. So if I want to make spaghetti coils, I can use that, or if I want to make a round coil, I can use that. And then I'm actually making a square end. So this just works like a mastic gun. Make sure your clay is soft. If you don't use soft clay, you will never get it through, and it is a nightmare. So I am just making them long enough to do what I want to do with them. So this is, as I say, it's a square die. So it's making a square coil. Well, yes, I suppose a square coil, which is a bit of an anomaly, but there we are. Okay, so that is that. They're horrible things to wash up as well. So, you know, all these pieces of kit. Right, so I'm going to move in. Here's one I made earlier. This one is obviously the largest, well, one of the largest sizes. So I have already started attaching the spines to this. So this was marked up in exactly the same way. And I've attached most of the spines. Now, as you can see, it's been standing upside down on the pot, and it's just got a little bit of damage to the spines from the pot edge, but it's still soft enough for me to just pull those up with a bit of pinching. All right, okay, so I've left 2 parts of this to attach so that you can see what I'm doing. I'm using the foam around the base. I probably don't need to do that now actually, because the foot, it was a bit soft yesterday when I was doing it, so I was trying not to stand it on the foot, but actually today I think the foot is probably solid enough. But obviously this is quite a big poppy head, so I didn't want to put the weight of the poppy head on the foot when it wasn't leather hard. This mould, so the bigger of the bisque moulds, this size, has been made from this bowl that came again from IKEA. So if you're going to use the bowl without the bisque cover, just cover it in cling film. Right, so I had marked out in exactly the same way as we did on the medium-sized one, and I have pre-scratched the line that I'd marked on. So this is already scratched, and indeed I'm just going to scratch the other one all the way down like so. Okay, and then again I'm going to put my glasses on and just slip this scratching, give it a good amount, and again on this side, getting that slip all the way down to the bottom. Don't be too, as I say, don't be too shy with it. Give it a good go. Right, so this square coil, I'm going to use it on its edge. So instead of putting it flat onto my pot, I'm going to put it on one of the edges, okay, so one of the corners of the coil. So what I'm doing is I'm putting the corner onto the slip and then pushing down from the top to make sure, again, that the clay is adhered to the actual pot surface. So I'm sacrificing the last corner of this square extrude by using it in a diamond shape. So what I'm left with is a corner on the top. Okay, so I haven't used it flat. All right, so I haven't got a flat surface here. I've used it on the corner so that I have a corner running down there, okay? So that's quite important because obviously if you want it to look like a spine, you don't want a flat surface. So I'm just going to pinch that on across the slip, and then I'm going to do the same on this side with this one. So again, I'm using the corner to actually go down onto the slip. Not too worried about this area because that area is going to be covered by a cap or indeed cut out, and we'll discuss that in a minute. So again, just going to make sure that I've missed a bit of slip on the bottom of there, that is pushed on to the slip, pinch that last bit off, and then make sure by pushing down, if you can see, I'm just using my fingers either side of that corner just to make sure that that is pushed on all the way up onto the piece. Right, at that point I'm going to use my little modelling tool. I expect everybody has a favourite tool. This is my favourite tool, probably 50 pence worth of wooden tool, and I always look for this one in the box of about 20 that we have in the studio because this is the one I like to use. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to join both sides of this coil by using this. I'm just going to see if I can lift that closer to you. Once you get all these spines on, they're quite difficult to manoeuvre. So I'm just pulling down from the coil onto the body. Okay, so I'm just joining that section together. Hope you can see what I'm doing. All right, so I'm just popping that down. I'm going to pop it down because it's difficult to hold and do the job. So it doesn't take very long. I'm trying not to lose this pointed profile of the spine when I'm joining. So I'm just running the tool down either side of what is now the triangle where we have pushed that square onto the pot. Let's just get that down like so. And that's why I did the others, because I thought I'd be here forever trying to demonstrate putting 8 spines on. So you don't have to be, as I say, again, doesn't have to be perfect. Just make sure it's properly attached, and then at the bottom I'm just going to make that slightly prettier. But again, actually when they're rugged they're quite nice. So, and then if you've got any sort of flat bits, you can just pinch and make it as rough or as smooth as you want to. I'm just going to repeat that by joining this spine on down the edge. Get quite a nice little gooey mess going on from the slip. But then at least if you do have that, you know that it's actually attached. So again, I'm just going to join that all the way down the side of that spine. Make sure it's attached. Probably should have just left one to demonstrate, but never mind. There we are. Okay, and again, I'm just tidying up, neatening up the bottom. Right, so I'm quite happy now that that is done. So, as I was saying, there's just a little bit of damage from the pot, but I don't really mind that. I quite like them to be perfectly imperfect. So let's just tidy that up. There we go. Right, so there you have your poppy now with 8 spines attached. Okay, so it's starting to look much more like a poppy than it did before. So the next stage is to do the top. Now, there are different ways of doing the top. You can make a sort of a disc and attach, which I'll show you in a moment. So this is a closed form with petals. You can basically let your creativity do what it wants to do. This one, as you can see, has got bobbled spines. So instead of the square extrude, I've made a sprig from a pearl necklace. Okay, so I had a pearl necklace that came from a charity shop, and it just happened to be the right size bead. It doesn't have to be pearls, it could be anything. And then I've just pressed it into a piece of clay, and then I use a coil on there and wipe away as much of that excess clay from the back of the sprig as I can. And then when I shake that out, that makes these bubbles, and then you can apply the bubbles in exactly the same way by when you put it on, and then you're left with bubbles on your spine. So those are quite nice sort of point of difference. If you're making a set, it's quite nice to have different styles on the spine. So that's how that one was made. You don't obviously have to make it into a poppy head at all. I'm going to turn that one up. You could use this make and then cover the whole thing in spines. So this one is a little bit different. I have just covered it in total in spines and then cut a hole. So that makes a sort of a seed pod of some description. So you don't have to make them into poppies. Now this one has been made slightly differently on the top. So this one has a hole, and then I've attached individual petals to the outside. So I'm going to show you both ways of doing that, just so that you've got the difference between the two. So this one is the closed form, and the way that I make my discs, let's move that out of the way, make myself a little bit more room. So I've rolled out a small slab. These have been in the bag for a day, so I hope they're not stuck. No, they're all right. So I've rolled out a small slab, not terribly thick. So this is thinner than the body of the poppy head. And then I've marked it up with 8 segments. Again, the same as we did before. And then I use the corner of a heart-shaped cutter. You could use anything, but this is what I use. I use the corner of a heart-shaped cutter, and I cut just a diamond out of the end of each of those lines. So let me just do that and I'll show you what I've done and you'll be able to see. Okay, so on the actual line itself, I've just taken out a triangle shape here with the end of the heart cutter. So I'm just going to do the rest of them very quickly. I do have here's one I made earlier, but I'll just do this one quickly. Again, you have time when you're making to do a little bit better job than me. So basically you end up with something that looks similar to this. And then I just tidy up the edges. You can make the edges, you can pinch them out a little bit more, make them a bit flatter, make them rounder just by pinching the edges. So Depends what you want to achieve at the end, okay? So this is the way that I do it. I then have sprig moulds that I've made that have different leaf designs on them. That's another one. And that's a third. And then I press the leaf design into each of the points of the petal, or whatever you want to call it, and then that makes a pattern on the top. Now this I have made, and it probably would be a better size for the medium poppy head. You kind of have to work out your proportions when you're doing this. So this is the medium size one that we haven't yet put the spines on. But you can see that that size of head is actually, it's not bad. It looks fine on there. If I move it over onto the large poppy head that we were working on, if I pop that on there, you'll see that that proportion's not right. It's too small. So when you're making your poppy head, think about in nature how wide the poppy head disc on the top of the head is. So that one is much too small to go on there. However, just think that it is the right size, and we'll go ahead and I'll just show you what I would do with it. I'm not actually going to attach this, but if I were to attach it, this lovely section in the centre where I have left the coils and have not cleaned them up is perfect, because I'm going to literally scratch through to adhere. Right, so then I would give it a really, really deep scratch all the way through, slip that section to make a nice muddy mess, and then attach the top by pressing in the centre. Okay, so I'm not going to do that because I want to show you how to do an open form, but that is how I would attach. And when it's attached, I then spend a little bit of time just deciding whether I want the tips of the top to turn up or turn down or pinch out, or what I want to happen to it. So then I just spend 5 minutes or so at the end just manipulating the top of the poppy head to how I want it to be, finishing touches. Okay, so that's how I would do it to get a closed form such as this one. And you can see that that is a bigger version of that disc. So it's just been made slightly bigger. And on this one, I've actually put spines on it as well, as you can see. So you can play with what you want to do with it. But that one's too small for this one. So I'm actually going to show you how to do the open form. So I've got out, do you know what? I'm going to have a slug of coffee. Cheers. Can't live without it, can we? Right. So I'm going to decide how big a hole I want to make in this. And I use pastry cutters because I find it's quite useful to visualise how big something's going to be once it's not there. So that's not big enough. That one is probably where I want it, but just to make a point, that one is probably too big. Okay, so kind of choose where you think you want to be. It doesn't want to be too small. This one is the example that I'm using. This one has semicircular spines, so I've taken a round coil, cut it in half and then applied it, so slightly different again. So this one, as I say, it has a hole in the centre, and that's what I'm kind of going for. So I'm trying to think about the size of the hole in terms of proportion to the finished piece. Okay, so I think I might actually just go one up from there. Yeah, I think we'll go with this one. Right, so if I show you that. Okay, so that's where I'm going. So I'm just going to push this cutter, make sure it's in the centre, glasses, make sure it's where I want it to be. and then I'm just going to push down carefully. I'm not going to cut through, I just want to mark. So I'm just marking using this cutter. Take the cutter out, get rid of those, and I'm going to use my knife. And I'm going to use my knife at 45 degrees because I want there to be an edge for me to attach the petals to. So rather than cutting with my knife straight, I'm cutting with my knife at 45 degrees. All right, so I'm going straight the way through the whole pot, and I'm just going to saw round, keeping my blade at 45 degrees, roughly on that guide line from the cutter, and then I've cut out the top, and as you can see that's got a beveled edge. So that's what I was trying to achieve, the beveled edge, to keep so that I've got somewhere to attach the petals to this section. If I cut it straight, then I'd have to attach the petal and bend it over, and what I want to do is actually let it sit on this beveled edge. Okay, so that is that, and then we need to make, and this is one I did not make earlier, we need to make a Toblerone. Okay, let me just squidgle this together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a coil that is triangular, like a Toblerone, but probably not as wide at the base. So I'm just going to use some of this soft reclaimed clay and just get it into a rough, very thick coil. We get rid of some of this stuff we don't need in front of us anymore. There we are. So I'm just going to roll out a really nice big coil. That's probably enough. And then I'm going to make it into a triangle, and I'm just not doing it all in one go. I'm just letting the clay find its level on the table. It's nice and soft, so it's moulding very easily, and it now has 3 sides. I don't want the bottom to be too wide, so at the moment I have this profile. So as you can see, she says, dropping it, you can see that it's like a Toblerone. So I'm just going to make the base a little bit narrower. I don't want it to be too wide at the bottom. You'll see why in a minute. Okay, so spend a little bit of time making your shape. Okay, right, so as you can see now, the bottom is less wide than it was, and that's the top profile like a triangle. Okay, so I'm going to cut the end off because I don't need the end. And then when you look at that profile, you can see that it's triangular. Okay, so the reason for making a coil this long is that I need 8 petals to go onto my piece, and when I cut the petals out, I don't want them to be too skinny. So that's probably slightly bigger than the size of the slab. That's just under, I would say, well, I suppose it's about 1/3 of an inch again. Okay, so I don't want them too skinny. If you make them too skinny, they're not robust enough in the garden. So that's a good point to remember. So I'm just cutting from my Toblerone the 8 petals that I need. In fact, I'll do 6. Keep your Toblerone, because if you muck up a petal, you've still got your Toblerone to work from. Right, so at this stage I have my piece of almost triangular clay ready to mould into the petals. So I'm going to scratch this whole surface really deeply round this 45-degree angle bed that I've made in the top of this poppy head. Actually, interestingly, it'd be worth saying that some of the students actually get to this stage, put a slightly larger hole in the top and then leave it so that it just becomes that rather than something with a top or with petals on. And actually they look really lovely in the garden. A slightly wider opening, but you can see the shape. It's really nice. So some of them do leave them to that shape. So I've scratched that really nicely, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to manipulate this petal a little bit, because I don't want it to look like a great big slab, but by the same token I don't want it to be too thin that it's going to be not robust enough if it rolls over in the garden or if it gets blown over in the wind. So try not to make the edges of your petal too thin, but I'm just pinching it out into a slightly nicer shape. I'm leaving the end where I'm going to attach thicker than the end of the petal, okay? So I've just literally just pinched that out into a nicer shape. And the other decision that you need to make is whether you want to add your petals between the spines, so like that, okay? So that's between the spines, or whether you want to attach your petals over the top of the spines, if you can see what I mean. So I've only got this one that is open topped, and you can see that the petals are over the top of the spine. So each petal comes up from the spine, and then the petal edge is over the top of the spine. So that is the way that I usually do it. It doesn't make a lot of difference, it's just a personal preference. So I'm going to slip this whole neck and give myself a really good sticky surface to stick the petals onto. And then when I'm making the petals, I usually say to the students, offer them up. So when you're making them, just offer them up. So I'm just going to lie that one there. I haven't attached it. I'm just offering it up just so that when I make the remainder of the petals, I know that they're going to fit round that surface. So again, I'm doing this really quickly. You will have more time to spend refining your petal shapes, more how you want to do them. Try not to make the base flare out too much, because otherwise you're going to run out of room around the neck of this piece. So as you can see, it doesn't take very long to do, but I'm just attaching them just to see what they look like before I commit, because I can always lift them up and just re-pinch them a little bit more if they're not quite the right shape. Okay, so just offer it up. I've got to cut a couple more, that's all right. One. Cut myself another couple off of my Toblerone. Okay. Be worth pointing out that I actually run courses in how to do this. So if you are a local person and you wanted to come and make a set of sculptural poppy heads for your garden, have a look on the website, which is www.thepotterycorner.co.uk. I mean, obviously at the moment, being January 2021, we're all locked down and there's no courses and no classes at the moment, but obviously that situation, God willing, will change. So have a look at the website if you'd like to come along and have a go. So I do teach regularly hand building classes and throwing classes. Right, so I've offered up my petals, as you can see, and they're going to fit round that circumference, so that's fine. So I have slipped the neck, so I need to slip the back of each petal, because obviously this is the section that's going to adhere to the slip. And just because I want to make sure they're absolutely joined, I'm just going to slip the back. And then when I come to adhere it, it's difficult to show you. There we go. Take that one off. I'm going to put that section onto the spine. Let's take these off, and then I can show you what I'm doing here. So what I'm doing is pushing the back onto the middle of that spine, just popping that on there. Okay, so I'm using that 45-degree angle bed to push my poppy on, so it's got a nice contact point with the pot. Okay, so I don't have to leave that sticking up like that, but for the time being I'm just going to adhere them all, make sure they all fit before I decide to commit and bend them over. So I'm just going to quickly attach the remainder, and again, as I say, you will have more time if you are going to take on this project, so do use your time to make this bit pretty, because this is the bit that people will see in terms of decoration. And I'm just pinching each of these petals into place. I just want to very quickly get them all on. If they're a little bit fat on their bases, just squeeze them in a bit and you'll find that they will fit. That's that one. And you can, of course, decorate the petals before you put them on with spines, or indeed you can actually do that afterwards with the spines on the petals, so you can do that. And last one, which always needs a little bit of a wiggle to get in, because by this time you've run out of space, but it will go in. So just wiggle that in. And then I'm just going to press the base of each of those petals in the mouth of here onto the 45-degree angle cut that we made on the poppy itself. And I'm just pushing my thumb underneath. So I'm just making sure that the excess of these petals is pushed round, so you give yourself a nice round throat shape, so you can't see any of that previously cut area. It's all covered with the clay from the petals. Okay, so that's what it looks like in the neck. Now I'm just going to tidy up where the slip joins are on the back of the petals, which is the reason why I didn't push them down before, because I just want to take away this excess slip and smudge and wet clay from the join. However, as I said before, you need that because obviously that's your attaching point. So I'm just tidying up round underneath the petals themselves, taking away the wet slip and just refining that join underneath so that they're nice and secure all the way around. Okay, so that now looks like that. All right, and then the last bit to do is to decide where you want your petals to be. So whether you want them to be standing up, whether you want them to be flat, or quite where you want them to end up. So my advice to you is less is more. Do each petal individually and carefully. Don't go too far, because you will weaken them if you keep wiggling them up and down. So just go easy when you start, And again, you can just pinch the form of the petal if it's not quite how you want it, and then just go easy on where you're positioning them in the first instance, just because if you go too far and you keep wiggling them, it weakens them. So that is sort of halfway, I would say, to flat. I quite like them to be slightly flatter as they would be in nature. They look a little bit contrived if they're too high. And again, I'm just refining the ends of the shapes of the petal as well as I'm doing this. So I'm slightly bending them and slightly shaping them so that each petal has its own personality and it sits on the pot or round the pot nicely in its form. You don't want them all to be the same size and shape, because again, in nature, not everything is perfect. So just spend a little bit of time. You'll have more time than I do on this video, just taking your time to shape your petals, okay? And then that's brought it down now so that they're a little bit flatter, as you can see. Okay, now these are very, very fragile in their greenware stage. So if you're popping them in the kiln or taking them somewhere to put them into a kiln, be careful, because these are really, you know, one little breath on them and they will flick off. So they're okay once they're fired, as you can see, nice and, you know, robust, but in the greenware stage, because anything sticking up gets knocked. So be careful. And then you can, as I say, these have got spines on the petals, as you can see here. So you could apply spines, or you could apply some texture or some scoring to give it some life. So, but that generally is it. Because this one has an open form at the top, I don't want it to fill with water. On the closed form ones, you would definitely have to make a hole in them, because you need to have air circulating in the kiln. So because this is an open form and because it needs to have a hole to drain water out, I'm just going to put in this whole thingy, and I've now got a disc inside, and I'm just cutting out a disc in the base, in the foot base, so that the water doesn't stay inside this head. I want the water to be able to drain away. As I say, it's robust, but it probably wouldn't be robust enough if it was full of water and then it froze. Okay, so I hope that that has been helpful. This is part one of a two-part tutorial video. So part two will be coming up shortly once I've finished these pieces, pop them through the biscuit firing, and then we'll discuss how I have decorated them in terms of glaze and oxide and using glass frit, which is what I've used on the top. So it's not actually glaze, it's glass frit. But we'll discuss that in the next video. So thank you for watching. Please subscribe to my channel, because then you'll be notified when the part two and indeed any of the other kiln opening videos or Top Tip Tuesday videos are published. So it's good to have you along. I'd appreciate your comments if you've got a comment, or even if you decide you want to make them. I'd really like to know. It's great to have feedback from you all. It really keeps the motivation going to get up on these cold, dreary January mornings, especially during lockdown. So it's good to have you all along, and I really appreciate it. So subscribe, give me a comment, let me know where you're watching from. That's always interesting too, because there's lots of people that watch from all over the world, and it's really remarkable how YouTube spreads itself so far and wide. So thank you for watching, much appreciated, and I'll see you on the next one. Thank you. Bye for now.